My name is Arthur, and for the past 4 years, I have worked as a senior compliance analyst at a mid-sized financial consulting firm located in a sleek, glass-fronted corporate tower downtown. My job is tedious, repetitive, and deeply analytical. I spend 8 to 9 hours a day poring over complex spreadsheets, identifying tax discrepancies, and ensuring our corporate clients adhere to federal regulations. Because my brain is constantly working under high cognitive stress, my daily schedule is calculated down to the absolute minute. I wake up at 5:30 a.m. every morning, spend an hour at the gym, and then dedicate 45 minutes to a ritual that keeps me grounded, cooking my own gourmet lunches. I am not talkative, and I don't care much for office politics or forced team-building exercises. My quiet sanctuary in that cold corporate environment has always been my food. My wife, Elena, is a professional pastry chef, and together we treat food as an art form. We don't pack soggy sandwiches or cheap instant noodles. Every night, we prepare exquisite meals for the next day. I'm talking about slowly braised beef short ribs over a bed of truffle-infused polenta, smoked Atlantic salmon with wild black rice and roasted asparagus, or double-stacked artisanal Wagyu burgers on freshly baked brioche buns with homemade garlic aioli. I pack these culinary masterpieces into high-end, vacuum-sealed glass containers, carefully placing them inside a matte black insulated lunch bag with dual ice packs. For me, 1 p.m. isn't just a lunch break. It's the psychological reward that gets me through the exhausting corporate grind. Everything changed 2 months ago when our department welcomed a new regional director of operations named Julian. Julian was the physical manifestation of corporate arrogance. He was a tall, sharply dressed 35-year-old who wore $2,000 tailored suits, boasted about his weekend golfing trips, and treated everyone below his pay grade like invisible background scenery. Julian's salary was easily 3 or 4 times my own, yet he possessed a toxic, parasitic trait that quickly became the nightmare of the entire third-floor office. Julian was a chronic, unrepentant breakroom thief. The corporate kitchen on our floor is a large, shared space equipped with 2 massive stainless steel refrigerators, 3 microwaves, and an array of high-end coffee machines. It is explicitly understood under unwritten corporate law that you do not touch anything that isn't yours. But Julian operated under a different set of rules. The rules of an apex predator who believed that everything within the office walls belonged to him by right of seniority. It started small. In his first week, a junior graphic designer named Maya noticed her premium oat milk kept vanishing from the fridge. A few days later, one of the IT support guys discovered his entire box of expensive imported protein bars had been ripped open, with half the contents missing. It didn't take long for the office to identify the culprit. On a Tuesday afternoon, Maya walked into the break room and caught Julian standing directly in front of the open refrigerator, casually drinking her oat milk straight from the carton. When Maya, visibly uncomfortable, said, Julian, excuse me, but that's actually my personal milk," Julian didn't even flinch. He slowly lowered the carton, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and gave her a smug, condescending smile. "Oh, is it?" Julian chuckled, tossing the half-empty carton into the trash bin. "My mistake, sweetie. I forgot to grab my grocery delivery this morning. Tell you what, just submit a requisition form to HR for a replacement, or better yet, look at it as a small contribution to executive productivity." He walked out of the room, leaving Maya stunned and humiliated. Because Julian was a high-level executive who brought in major clients, nobody dared to confront him directly. The HR department was completely toothless. When Maya filed an anonymous complaint, the HR manager pulled her into a private meeting and gently advised her not to create unnecessary friction with upper management over minor grocery items. This lack of accountability only fueled Julian's sense of entitlement. He realized he was completely untouchable, and his behavior escalated from petty grazing to systematic food piracy. 3 weeks ago, the corporate hammer fell on me. It was a grueling Thursday. I had been at my desk since 7 a.m. dealing with a massive regulatory audit, and by the time 1 p.m. rolled around, my stomach was roaring with hunger. The night before, Elena and I had prepared something truly special, a slow-roasted teriyaki duck breast over a bed of sesame-infused jasmine rice, garnished with microgreens and pickled ginger. It was packed in my distinct, heavy glass container with my name, Arthur Compliance, written clearly across the lid in permanent black marker. I walked into the break room, washed my hands, and opened the heavy stainless steel door of Fridge A. I reached toward the second shelf where I always placed my matte black insulated bag. The bag was unzipped. I pulled it out, my heart sinking as I realized it felt incredibly light. I unzipped the main compartment. It was completely empty. My glass container was gone. My blood ran cold. I spun around, scanning the break room. Sitting at the main communal oak table, with his legs crossed and his expensive leather shoes resting on an adjacent chair, was Julian. He had my heavy glass container resting right in front of him. He was using his own silver fork to shove massive, greedy bites of my slow-roasted teriyaki duck into his mouth, while casually scrolling through an iPad. I walked over to the table, my fists clenching at my sides. I stood directly over him, casting a shadow across his screen. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a dangerously low, flat tone. "You're eating my lunch." My name is written in giant letters right across that lid. Julian didn't look up immediately. He slowly chewed the duck breast, swallowed deliberately, and then looked up at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated amusement. "Ah, Arthur, right? From compliance," Julian said, gesturing to the container with his fork. "Man, whoever makes your meals is an absolute genius. This duck is perfectly rendered. The teriyaki glaze has just the right amount of ginger. Give it back, Julian." "Now," I said, trying to control the visible tremble of rage in my voice. Julian let out a loud, mocking laugh, leaning back in his chair. "Give it back." "Arthur, look at the container. It's already 3/4 gone. What do you want me to do? Spit it back in for you." "Come on, don't be so dramatic. It's just a lunchbox. Consider it a compliment to your kitchen skills. Go down to the lobby and grab a $15 salad from the bistro. Put it on my tab." "Oh, wait, you can't because I don't have a tab there. Just let it go, man. We're all on the same team here." He turned his attention back to his iPad, completely dismissing me as if I were nothing more than an annoying fly. I stood there for 5 seconds, the entire break room going dead silent, as 3 other coworkers watched the interaction in terrified silence. I knew that if I swung on him, if I let my anger dictate my actions, I would be fired on the spot for workplace violence, losing my seniority, my stock options, and my livelihood. Julian wanted me to react. He fed on the power dynamic. I didn't say another word. I turned around, walked out of the break room, and went down to the lobby to buy a stale, dry turkey sandwich from the vending machine. As I forced the bland, cardboard-like food down my throat at my desk, I watched Julian walk past my cubicle 20 minutes later. He casually tossed my empty, unwashed $30 glass container into the communal sink, leaving it for the cleaning staff to wash. He thought he had won. He thought I was just another corporate drone who would take the humiliation, swallow my pride, and pack a cheaper lunch the next day. But Julian made a fundamental error in judgment. He forgot what I do for a living. I am a compliance analyst. I don't fight with my fists, and I don't yell. I analyze patterns, I identify systemic vulnerabilities, and I execute precise, calculated corrections. Julian had officially entered my ledger, and I was about to audit his entire existence. That evening, I sat at my kitchen island in complete, icy silence. Elena was busy organizing her pastry molds, but she immediately noticed the dark aura hanging over me. When I told her exactly how Julian had eaten our handcrafted teriyaki duck and laughed in my face, her eyes narrowed. As a professional chef, she views food theft not just as a boundary violation, but as a desecration of labor. "So what's the plan?" she asked, setting her rolling pin down with a firm thud. "We don't just let an executive parasite get away with that." "We don't get mad, Elena," I replied softly, opening my laptop. "We comply with his request. He said whoever makes my meals is a genius, and he wanted more. So, we're going to make him a meal he will never, ever forget. Since I am a compliance analyst, I began conducting systematic research into the exact physiological limits of human tolerance regarding capsicum, the active chemical compound that makes peppers hot. I wasn't looking to cause physical harm or permanent injury, as that would violate corporate policy and civil law. I needed a completely legal, food-safe, yet entirely overwhelming compound. My research led me to an industrial hot sauce supply company. I ordered a 1-ounce vial of pure, laboratory-verified Carolina Reaper extract, rated an astonishing 2 million Scoville heat units. To give you some context, a standard jalapeno pepper sits around 5,000 Scoville units. This extract was essentially weapons-grade culinary paint. But the heat alone wasn't enough. A clever thief might take one bite, spit it out, yell, and the drama would end right there in the break room. I needed absolute, undeniable physical proof that would expose him in front of the entire corporate hierarchy. For that, I reached into the world of professional baking and food manufacturing. I sourced a highly concentrated, specialized, oil-based high-intensity blue food dye, paste used for industrial cake decoration. This wasn't the cheap, watery dye you buy at the local supermarket. This was a professional-grade, hydrophobic chemical pigment. When mixed with fats and oils, it binds instantly to organic surfaces, like the human tongue, gums, teeth, and lips. It is completely odorless, entirely tasteless, and once it comes into contact with saliva, it activates, staining the tissue a brilliant, vibrant, smuff blue color that cannot be washed away with soap, water, or alcohol for at least 72 hours. On Sunday night, Elena and I began preparing the bait. We decided to create the ultimate corporate trap, an incredibly luxurious, visually spectacular artisanal Wagyu beef burger. Elena baked a flawless, golden brioche bun, glazing it with a light egg wash and a dusting of black sesame seeds. I ground a premium cut of heavily marbled Wagyu beef, shaping it into a thick, juicy patty. But as I formed the meat, I used a spoon to create a deep, hidden pocket directly in the center of the raw patty. Inside that secret pocket, I deposited 10 drops of the 2 million Scoville Carolina Reaper extract. Then, I mixed 3 tablespoons of homemade, rich garlic aioli with a massive dose of the concentrated blue industrial dye paste. Because the dye was so intensely pigmented, it turned the aioli into a deep, dark, almost black charcoal color. When spread thickly inside the center of the burger, surrounded by caramelized onions and melted pepper jack cheese, it looked completely natural, like a trendy, gourmet black truffle or a charcoal-infused reduction sauce. I seared the Wagyu patty perfectly to medium rare, locking the liquid lava and the chemical dye securely inside the core of the meat. I assembled the burger with crisp heirloom tomatoes and organic arugula. It looked like a $50 masterpiece straight from a Michelin star restaurant. I placed the burger inside my signature heavy glass container. On the clear lid, I took out a fresh, extra thick black Sharpie and wrote in massive, bold capital letters, "Property of Arthur Compliance. Do not touch." I placed the container inside my matte black insulated lunch bag, zipped it shut, and set my alarm for Monday morning. When I arrived at the corporate tower at 7:45 a.m., the office was quiet. I walked straight into the third-floor break room. I opened fridge, which was completely empty at this early hour, and placed my black lunch bag dead center on the middle shelf. It sat there like a ticking time bomb, completely visible to anyone who opened the door. As the morning progressed, I sat in my cubicle, calmly running data audits on our Q2 financial reports. At 10:30 a.m., I noticed Julian stroll past my desk. He was wearing a flawless, crisp, white Armani dress suit with a lavender silk tie, a wardrobe choice that made me smile internally. He was heading toward the break room with his usual arrogant, swinging stride, holding his iPad under his arm. I kept my eyes fixed on my dual monitors, typing rhythmically, but my ears were tuned to the sounds of the office. 5 minutes later, the heavy glass door of the break room swung open. Julian walked out, carrying my matte black insulated bag by the handle. He didn't even try to hide it. He walked right past the cubicles of 3 junior analysts, gave a generic nod to the assistant manager, and retreated into his massive, private corner executive office. Through the glass walls of his office, I watched him sit down at his grand mahogany desk, unzip my bag, and pull out the heavy glass container. He looked at the giant black letters reading Property of Arthur, Compliance, let out a brief, mocking smirk, and tossed the plastic lid casually into his executive trash can. My heart rate didn't even elevate. I slowly reached for my office mug, took a sip of black coffee, and began a silent countdown on my desktop timer. Julian pulled a premium set of silverware from his desk drawer. He picked up the massive Wagyu burger with both hands, admiring its gourmet presentation through the glass wall. He opened his mouth wide and took a massive, greedy bite, sinking his teeth directly into the center of the patty, puncturing the hidden core where the 2 million Scoville heat extract and the industrial blue pigment were waiting. The trap had officially sprung. For the first 3 seconds, Julian's face through the glass partition showed absolute bliss. He was chewing the premium Wagyu beef, nodding his head in sheer satisfaction at the gourmet texture. But then his jaw stopped moving. The delayed chemical reaction of the 2 million Scoville Carolina Reaper extract hits the human nervous system like an explosion. Capsaicin of that concentration doesn't just taste hot. It tricks the brain into believing the body is literally on fire. Julian's eyes suddenly widened to the size of saucers. The color drained from his face, leaving him a ghostly, pale white against his lavender silk tie. He dropped the remaining 3/4 of the burger back into the glass container, his hands visibly shaking. Through the glass, I watched his posture fracture completely. The smooth, arrogant regional director vanished, replaced by a panicked animal. He frantically reached for a bottle of expensive, sparkling water on his desk, unscrewed it with trembling fingers, and chugged the entire bottle in 4 seconds. But capsaicin is entirely hydrophobic, meaning it is an oil-based compound. Plain water doesn't wash it away. It merely spreads the microscopic fire across the entire roof of the mouth, the throat, and the tongue. The moment the water hit his throat, a violent, hacking cough racked his entire body. He slammed his fist onto his mahogany desk, knocking over his iPad. He stood up so fast his leather executive chair rolled backward and slammed into the filing cabinet. Julian was gasping for air, his mouth wide open, his hands fanning his face in absolute desperation. And that's when the second phase of the trap manifested. Because the industrial blue food dye paste was also oil-based, it had completely bonded with the saliva and tissue inside his mouth. As Julian stood there gasping and panting like a marathon runner, the brilliant, vibrant smuff blue pigment began to bleed outward. Within 30 seconds, his entire tongue, his teeth, his gums, and the outer perimeter of his lips were stained a deep, unnatural, glowing neon blue. It looked as though he had swallowed an entire industrial ink cartridge. Julian ran to his private executive washroom inside his office. I could hear the sink running furiously. He was desperately scraping at his tongue with paper towels and rinsing with mouthwash. But the hydrophobic nature of the professional cake dye meant it was entirely impervious to simple scrubbing. It was locked into his cells. While Julian was trapped in his office experiencing a culinary crisis, our internal office speakers chimed. "Attention all senior staff." The receptionist's voice echoed through the floor. "The quarterly compliance and operations board meeting is starting in 5 minutes in the main glass conference room. Managing partners and the chief financial officer have just arrived." My desktop calendar flashed with a reminder. This wasn't just any meeting. It was the biggest presentation of the fiscal year, where the top owners of the firm flew in from New York to review our budget allocations. Julian was scheduled to lead the entire presentation. Exactly 4 minutes later, the door to Julian's private office slowly opened. He emerged, and the transformation was staggering. He had tried to wipe his mouth, which only succeeded in smearing the bright blue dye across his chin and upper lip, giving him a bizarre, clownish blue goatee. He was sweating profusely. His expensive hair was disheveled, and his eyes were bloodshot and watery from the agonizing heat still radiating in his chest. He clutched his leather presentation folder to his chest like a shield and began walking down the central hallway toward the main conference room. Every single person in the cubicles stopped typing. 30 analysts, designers, and accountants stared in absolute, stunned silence as Julian walked past, his mouth stained completely neon blue, his breathing ragged. "Julian, are you okay?" Maya, the graphic designer, asked as he stumbled past her desk. Julian tried to speak, to maintain his authoritative director persona, but the heat had constricted his vocal cords. "I'm fine," he wheezed. But the moment he opened his mouth, the entire row of cubicles got a full view of his bright blue teeth and sapphire tongue. A collective, muffled gasp ran through the room. Julian ignored them and ducked in the main glass conference room, closing the door behind him. Through the transparent walls, I could see the three managing partners, older, ultra-conservative billionaires in dark gray suits, sitting at the long marble table alongside our CFO. Julian took his place at the head of the table, clicked his remote, and began his slideshow. I quietly stood up from my cubicle, grabbed a folder of tax reports, and walked over to the filing cabinets located directly adjacent to the conference room doors, giving me a front row seat to the unfolding corporate disaster. Julian opened his mouth to deliver his opening remarks. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," he began, his voice cracking into a high-pitched pitch. The CFO stopped writing mid-sentence. The senior managing partner from New York slowly lowered his reading glasses, staring at Julian's face with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "Julian," the managing partner interrupted, his voice dripping with aristocratic disapproval. "What on earth is wrong with your face? Have you been eating candy markers prior to a multi-million-dollar budget presentation?" Julian froze, his hand trembling on the laser pointer. "No, sir. I had a minor dietary reaction during lunch." "A dietary reaction that turned your entire mouth neon blue?" the CFO snapped, leaning forward. "You look completely absurd. You are sweating through your Armani suit. Your face is smeared with pigment, and you can barely form a coherent sentence. Is this how you represent our regional operations to the executive board?" Julian tried to defend himself, but the residual capsaicin fire triggered another massive, uncontrollable fit of coughing. He gasped for air, opening his mouth wide, revealing the deep, dark blue cavern of his mouth to the most powerful men in the company. He looked less like an executive director and more like a cartoon character who had survived an explosion. "Enough," the senior managing partner said, slamming his folder shut with a sound like a gunshot. "This presentation is postponed until tomorrow morning. Julian, leave this room immediately, clean yourself up, and prepare a written explanation for your erratic behavior. Your conduct today is highly unprofessional." Part 4, the final audit. Julian stumbled out of the main conference room, his face burning with a mixture of intense residual capsaicin heat and pure, unadulterated humiliation. The managing partners brushed past him in disgusted silence, heading straight to the executive elevators. The third-floor office was dead quiet, save for the rhythmic clicking of my keyboard as I returned to my cubicle, calmly logging my afternoon data entries. Julian didn't go back to his office to wash his face. He was completely past the point of reason. Fueled by raw, vengeful rage, he marched directly down the hall to the Human Resources Department, slamming his leather folder onto the HR director's desk. "I want Arthur fired," Julian bellowed, his voice cracking violently. When he opened his mouth, his teeth and tongue still glowed a striking, deep sapphire blue. "He poisoned me. He intentionally planted a toxic, hazardous substance in the communal refrigerator to sabotage my presentation and assault an executive officer." 10 minutes later, my desk phone buzzed. It was Sarah, the HR director. "Arthur, please step into the main HR office immediately. Bring your supervisor." I didn't panic. I slowly locked my desktop terminal, adjusted my tie, picked up a neat manila folder I had prepared over the weekend, and walked down the hallway. My direct supervisor, a pragmatic senior manager named David, joined me, looking incredibly confused. When we entered the HR office, Julian was pacing back and forth like a caged predator. His lips were swollen, his mouth was completely smeared with bright blue pigment, and he looked entirely unhinged. Sarah sat behind her desk, looking deeply exhausted by the corporate drama. "Arthur," Sarah began, her tone formal but strained. "Director Julian is making a very serious allegation against you. He claims that you brought a poisoned lunch item into the office today with the express intent of causing him physical harm and sabotaging his board presentation. How do you respond to this?" I calmly sat down in the open chair, placed my manila folder on the desk, and slid it over to Sarah. "I have no idea what Director Julian is talking about," I replied, keeping my voice level, flat, and entirely devoid of emotion. "I simply brought my standard, private homemade lunch to work today, as I do every single morning. If Director Julian suffered a medical emergency, I fail to see how that involves my personal property." "Your personal property?" Julian shrieked, pointing a blue-stained finger at my face. "You put weapons-grade chili extract and industrial cake dye inside that burger. You knew damn well I was going to eat it." I turned my head slowly to look at him, raising an eyebrow. "Julian, are you openly admitting to the Director of Human Resources and my supervisor that you intentionally stole my private property out of an insulated bag in a closed refrigerator?" "That's not the point," Julian yelled, turning to Sarah. "Look at my face. Look at my mouth. He engineered a biological trap. It's a violation of corporate safety guidelines." I gently tapped the manila folder in front of Sarah. "Sarah, if you open that file, you will find 3 pieces of documented evidence that completely clear me of any wrongdoing under our corporate compliance framework." Sarah opened the folder. Inside was a neatly printed sheet of paper, a certified receipt, and an official allergy declaration. "Document number 1, I explained, pointing to the first page, is a copy of the official corporate breakroom policy handbook, signed by all employees, including Julian. Section 4, paragraph B clearly states, the company provides refrigeration units solely for the storage of personal meals. Employees are strictly prohibited from consuming, tampering with, or removing food items that do not belong to them. Doing so constitutes theft of personal property and a direct violation of the corporate code of conduct." Julian opened his mouth to interrupt, but David, my supervisor, held up a hand, silencing him. "Let the analyst speak, Julian." "Document number 2, I continued, is a certified copy of my official medical file and dietary profile. For the past 3 years, I have been an active member of an extreme culinary capsicum club. I regularly consume ultra-hot peppers as a personal hobby. My gastrointestinal tract has a documented high tolerance for high Scoville foods. Furthermore, the blue paste used in that burger is a standard 100% organic, FDA-approved food-grade baking dye. It is completely non-toxic and safely digestible. I put in my sauce simply because my wife and I like colorful, avant-garde food presentation." Sarah looked at the medical documentation and the food safety data sheet, nodding slowly. "And finally, document number 3, I said, sliding a high-resolution color photograph across the desk. "This is a photo of the glass container I brought into the office today, taken this morning before I placed it in fridge A. As you can clearly see, written in giant, 2-inch black permanent marker across the center of the lid are the words, 'Property of Arthur, Compliance. Do not touch.'" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. I provided ample, explicit, high-visibility regulatory warnings on my property. I brought a meal tailored to my specific, documented dietary preferences. Julian consciously chose to bypass my security parameters, violate corporate theft policy, and steal my private lunch. His adverse reaction to my standard food profile is entirely a consequence of his own illegal behavior. If anything, I am the one filing a formal complaint today for executive harassment and chronic workplace theft. The HR office went completely silent. Sarah looked at the immaculate paperwork, then looked up at Julian, whose face was a mixture of absolute shock and blue-rimmed fury. "Arthur is entirely correct, Julian," Sarah said, closing the folder with a heavy sigh. "Under company policy, you cannot claim you were poisoned by an item you actively stole out of another employee's private label container. Arthur put a clear warning on his box. You ignored it. You violated our anti-theft policy, and in doing so, you humiliated yourself and disrupted a multi-million-dollar presentation in front of the managing partners." "Are you serious?" Julian stammered, his blue lips trembling. You're taking the compliance drone side? I'm taking the side of our legal compliance framework, Sarah snapped. And honestly, Julian, your behavior today has left us in a massive liability position. The managing partners are furious about the postponed meeting. I suggest you go home, figure out how to wash your face, and prepare for a formal internal review regarding your conduct and your future with this firm. 2 weeks later, the official corporate transition memo was sent out via email to the entire tri-state region. Julian was quietly stripped of his title as Regional Director of Operations due to conduct unbecoming of executive leadership and a failure to meet Q2 presentation metrics. He was reassigned to a low-level, isolated field office 3 states away, with a massive pay cut and zero corporate authority. The day he packed his things into a cardboard box, he walked past my cubicle one last time. His mouth was still faintly tinted a pale, ghostly shade of blue around the edges of his gums. He glared at me with pure hatred. I didn't say a word. I simply offered him a polite, corporate nod and went back to my spreadsheets. The corporate food chain had been perfectly recalibrated. The apex predator was gone, and the kitchen was safe once more. Every single afternoon at 1 p.m., I walk into the third-floor break room. Fridge A is perfectly organized, the communal atmosphere is quiet, and my matte black insulated lunch bag sits entirely undisturbed on the middle shelf. I sit at the oak table, open my fresh glass container, and enjoy my gourmet meal in absolute, peaceful compliance. Thank you so much to our incredible corporate survival community for watching this tactical break room audit. If this kitchen victory reminded you that documentation, strict logic, and a dash of laboratory-grade spice will always dismantle arrogant workplace bullies, make sure to slam that like button right now. Drop your own office thief horror stories or corporate victories in the comments below. Hit that notification bell and subscribe to the channel for more calculated strategic executions. Stay safe, label your containers, and I will see you in the next compliance update. Take care.